Mm-hmm. All right, welcome back after the break. Now you guys are going to be stuck with me for around 5 hours. We're going to do 4 hours of the retention. Retention is divided into two parts. We have retention 1, and then after lunch, we're going to do retention part 2. Typically, we do need a lunch break because people are really tired. So again, I would truly recommend you guys to find some snack and eat some snack now. Because typically, again, we find that people are super tired at the end of part 1. When it comes to retention, this is what we're going to be talking about. So prior to lunch, we're going to talk about why retention matters. We're going to talk about product market fit, what it means and how it's relevant to retention. And then also how to measure retention and why probably all of you are measuring retention incorrectly, or you're probably not measuring retention at all. Then we're going to talk about the product usage interval, and then after that we're going to do the retention lifecycle framework, and then microsegmentation. Now, before we dive into this, I think it's super important to clarify how important retention is. I'll speak briefly about myself and my own reflection on the importance of retention. So, some of you might know, and it's been introduced, I do the curriculum at Prototype. Prior to doing curriculum at Prototype, I have founded 2 companies. I sold one of the companies, and then I've had growth at 2 companies, where first one we did became the 3rd largest marketplace in the US. So we grew in 2 years to be an extremely large organization. And then I moved back to Norway, and then within 2 years we went from being 15 employees to 200 employees and doing 40 million in yearly revenue. Most of that simply just comes because we focus on retention. And especially if you're good at retention, then it's quite fun to be in the market with competitors, because what you'll find is that most of them do not focus on retention and activation. So you're competing against the amateurs, which are working at the top of the funnel, and then you can finally have some fun at the actual powerful parts. So before we go into the deck, these are some disclaimers. This is for sure a slightly advanced deck. So if you guys have had any struggles with the topic so far, then you're about to get your mind blown, because this is definitely a step up when it comes to the technical aspects and everything else. Some of the perks when it comes to retention is that small increases in retention can have a dramatic increase in profits. I don't think people fully understand how important this is or how powerful it is. And we're going to take a look at an example where we truly see how just improving retention slightly can lead to insane increase in revenue. The third part is you can't really Google anything when it comes to retention. That's also why most growth hackers are really, really bad at retention. And also why most growth hackers tend to stick to top of the funnel and creating Facebook ads and doing stuff on Instapage. Simply because on top of the funnel you can go acquisition playbook for Facebook ads, and then you'll find 3 people who blog about it. If you try to Google retention, you'll find nothing. There's literally nothing out there, which is also because retention is quite unique to each business. So there's no really good way to structure or format a blog article to talk about retention. Plus, it requires you to have your own brain rather than just looking at what everyone else is doing, which, again, to most people is an issue. You'll get tons of ideas for the growth app, hopefully. We're going to talk through the entire process. We're also going to discuss segmentation and everything else. Also in part 2, you're going to get examples that are definitely applicable to each company. So if you have the growth app already, you can just add them onto the growth app. Retention is probably the best thing you can do to upskill yourself currently as a growth hacker when it comes to making yourself more valuable. It's in incredibly high demand. Also, for sure, if you look in the growth hacking industry, I would already say that the industry is quite well paid. But I would on top of that say for sure that the people who focuses on retention are definitely the highest paid people in the industry. So it's definitely a lucrative skill set to have.
What's the average salary?
The salary you currently get. And finally, it puts you in the top percentage of growth hackers. Again, a lot of growth hackers don't really know how to do this, which is because a lot of people who are into growth hacking learn growth hacking from other people who are in growth hacking, and then it becomes this just circle of people teaching each other Instapage and top of the funnel stuff. Furthermore, there's another disclaimer, which is I have quite strong opinions about everything that is related to growth, also about retention. So before we start, I figured we should do them. Kind of one of my strongest opinions is that growth does not belong in the marketing department. It has nothing to do in the marketing department. I firmly believe that the growth team should be in the product team, or it should be the product team. Furthermore, I do not think that top of the funnel is a skill set that is really relevant for growth hackers. I think that's something that the marketing department can do. It doesn't really require us. I think bottom of the funnel, so more specifically activation and retention, is where growth hackers should probably spend 80% of their time. If you look at the shift in the industry as well, you see more and more focus on activation currently kind of increasing, and then also on retention. But you can also see a very dramatic difference between how growth hackers in Europe are doing things versus how people are doing in the US. So I would say in Europe, we're currently still and very much focused on top of the funnel. While if you take a look at Silicon Valley and how the growth hackers are working there and what they're focusing on, you see that they're pretty much all just focused on activation and retention, and that's the majority of their job. Furthermore, in the best product, it's more about what isn't there. So retention and activation is for sure product-focused steps in the funnel. So everything prior to that, you don't really have to have an opinion once again. But when it comes to activation and retention, then we all of a sudden need to have opinions, and we need to understand how a product works and how to design a product. And in the best product, it's more about what isn't there. So I'm going to talk about features and everything else. And I think a lot of people that are new to retention, when they think about how they can improve retention, the first thing they think about is, well, I'm just going to add this new feature. Hopefully by the end of the deck, then you're not going to think that, and hopefully kind of shame the people in the company who does think that. The biggest enemy to the bottom of the funnel are lazy people. Again, top of the funnel is, to me, incredibly easy. The reason why most people don't want to dive into activation and retention is simply because people are lazy. It does take more reading, and it does kind of require you to, again, actively think rather than just Googling around and running ads. Your business is not as unique, or it's not as unique as you think it is. This is probably like the number one thing I want to say before we get started with the deck, because I feel like half of you are going to do this one, which is like, yeah, but you don't understand, my business is so much harder than everyone else's. And everyone always does this, or this. Yeah, but for us, it's just slightly bit different, because our business model is just slightly different than everyone else's. If this is you, then please get over yourself. Every single company thinks they have the toughest business. Nobody is able to relate to kind of their issues and everything else. That's really not the case. The case is people just like to feel like they have the toughest issues, so they have something to blame it on, right? So please don't justify failure. Your business is not as unique as you think it is, and we're actually going to be able to kind of apply retention to it as well if you just don't justify failure. So when it comes to the part funnel, we're now on the retention part. So the top part is what I call marketing, and then for activation, retention, referral, you're more focused on the product center. So far in kind of every presentation you guys have had, you've been focusing on tools and tricks that you can use. Now the mindset is very much focused on products. So kind of just rewire your brain and think more about how we can improve the product, how you can make changes to the product and everything else, rather than thinking about tools and optimization. So the 5 learning goals for the retention deck is to really understand why retention matters. Hopefully I'm going to get some of you guys to stop what you're currently focusing on and start moving to retention. That's my goal. The second part is, what is retention? I don't really think people know what retention is. I think people look and have seen a retention graph, and then they go, okay, this looks okay. And then they just kind of leave the graph and they have no clue kind of what to do with the graph. So our goal is to really understand what it is, and furthermore, how we can work with it. So how to improve retention. Again, we've talked about this classic churn graph that most people have seen. That graph is not really relevant to us as growth hackers. It's a very good graph when it comes to communicating to stakeholders how you're doing when it comes to progression. It's not really useful when it comes to optimizing and working with it on a day-to-day basis. So we're going to figure out how we can actually work on it on a day-to-day basis. Fourth is, what is product market fit? You guys have gotten an introduction to product market fit. I still think there's a lot of people who get product market fit wrong, and I'm still sure quite a few of you still get product market fit wrong, so I'm going to debunk some myths about product market fit and what it actually means. And then we're also going to talk about this concept of product usage interval and how you can calculate that for your own business in order to be able to kind of calculate your true retention. And then finally, at the end, prior to lunch, we're going to do microsegmentation. So this is going to be a hands-on exercise where you guys also get to work with a data set that I've generated, and then you're going to take that data set, you're going to import it into Mixpanel, and then we're going to do segmentation based on a user persona. And I feel like by now, this is probably one of you. There's one in like every classroom that is very certain that they do not have retention. If this is you, then I'm sorry to inform you, you do have a retention. Every business has retention. If you've been told otherwise, be it by your boss or anything else, or your nice head of growth, then they're wrong. And I feel like it's your job to tell them that they're wrong. What they don't understand is we have two concepts of retention. We have something we call account retention, and we have something we call user retention. Most people, when they think about retention, they think about what we call account retention. Account retention isn't that important to focus on compared to user retention. The reason why is if we can focus on user retention and improve user retention, you'll find that the correlation when it comes to improvement in user retention is very strongly related to account retention, which means that if you do optimize user retention, the perks will kind of move on and transfer to account retention. The difference are account retention is typically a billing cycle. So say, for example, if we talk about like a SaaS app, then account retention would be to ensure that they pay each month. User retention is more about the actual usage by the users themselves and the actions that they take within the app. So what we would say is that instead of having the company focus on making sure that the company pays the bill the next month and everything else, we're not going to focus on that. We're going to focus on user retention, which means that we want the users to be more engaged with our app and actually enjoy using it. And as a result, if you do have people actively using your app, you'll find that quite often it does relate to the fact that they will renew their subscription. So we're going to focus on user retention, not account retention. Okay, so let's discuss some of the points why we do want to focus on retention. This is probably my favorite quote, just to piss off the marketers in the room. So this comes from McKinsey. The quote is, "There's absolutely no correlation between marketing investment and growth rates." It's also done by McKinsey on publicly traded software companies. So what they mean by that is that McKinsey has done a study on publicly traded companies. They were able to find absolutely zero correlation between marketing budget and the growth rate of the company itself. Which means if you're a marketer, prove them wrong. So far, I kind of believe what McKinsey says. I really doubt there is a correlation between marketing budget and growth rates. Furthermore, retention has...
Wouldn't it be different if it's not like a software company? If it's more like you're selling physical products? Or like, would it apply exactly the same to different types of business?
I mean, I would assume not. It's just this study is done on software companies. I would say in general, marketing is heavily overrated. Plus, it's very hard to actually measure the value of it, which is what marketers love, because that means they can continue to get budget. So yeah, why do we focus on retention? Retention has a bigger impact than top of the funnel. We will go through this in an exercise where you will see with your own eyes how retention does have a bigger impact than optimizing on top of the funnel. Furthermore, something that I don't think people understand, and it's kind of more of a mindset, is that every single time a user actually signs up for your platform, they truly want to be retained. So every single user that has signed up for your product actually wants to be retained by your product. It's just you're not able to retain them. So what I mean by that is that they've seen the value proposition that you've had, they've seen the solution that you offer to their problem, and they've decided to give in your product a chance, right? So they fundamentally want to be retained by your product, which means that it's up to you to make sure that you can actually retain them. So please understand and go in with the mindset that a user does want to be retained when they do sign up. And kind of the model that we're going to introduce now, which is the retention lifecycle framework, is how retention is done systematically at pretty much all the fastest growing companies. So this is the retention model that's used at the growth team at Uber. It's used on Twitter, Pinterest, Airbnb, Atlassian, and pretty much all of them.
Sorry, can I ask you something really quick?
Yes.
So if type of the business is built in such a way that the customer uses the service every 5 or 7 years,
yep,
on average, is it like the retention is slightly different, or than what you are going to cover here, like, or?
No, just the product usage interval would be different. So some things you use once every hour, some things you use once a month, something you use once a year. You can just define you define it on the graph. It doesn't really matter. But of course, it's a longer scope, so you might have higher churn. I don't know. Cool. The way I think about retention is I try to compare it to real life, and that's also when you understand that retention, or it, all of a sudden it makes more sense why retention isn't that popular. New users is kind of like dating, and everyone likes dating. So most of the people stay at the dating phase. However, retention is more about marriage. Now, I know for all of you guys, you're like, oh, dating's super fun, you know, Tinder, you can swipe that shit, and then you can go to a bar, you get drunk, and then everything else kind of just happens. My job is to try to convey you guys, or persuade you guys to also think about marriage, and the perks that marriage can bring, even though it's slightly more repetitive. Furthermore, typically what we see when it comes to measuring retention for different industries, when it comes to e-commerce, typically the main measurement is what we call a repurchase. Repurchase here is both account retention and user retention at the same time, because in an e-commerce what you sell is goods. In a SaaS, it's very often to repeat the core action. So pretty much every SaaS app has a main action, which is the value that the platform delivers. It's that. And then for the annoying ones who wants to question whether or not every industry has retention, I did like a super weird one, which is like a one-off loan. So say, for example, if you provide mortgages or everything else, then I would say for a mortgage provider, you can also define retention as capability of repayment. So say, for example, if you've taken up a loan and you have a 30-year repayment plan, then you can call user retention on their ability to do repayments, and then you can optimize for helping them actually succeed in their repayment of the loan. Before we kind of dive in, I do know that retention is difficult, and I also know acquisition is very sexy. I mean, I assume you guys have all done Hotjar, you've done like heat maps and screen recordings and ads, just really like nice visual stuff that you guys are really fond of. Retention is really not like that. It is a bit more challenging, but it's also a lot more rewarding, I think, to work with as well. So before we kind of dive in, we're going to go through some stats. I feel like this is like the common go-to stat when everyone talks about retention, which is pretty much that it costs a ton of more money to attract a new user than it just costs to keep an existing one. It's quite straightforward. If we apply to kind of like the dating life again, then finding a new partner is quite hard. It also costs a lot of money to find a new partner. Like going to a bar every Friday, it does cost money, you know. But being married, it's a lot more affordable. Because Netflix and chill is quite more affordable than being at a bar. So what I'm trying to say is that if you do a cost analysis, it's actually better for you to be married than to constantly keep dating. So think about that. Furthermore, repeat customers are likely to spend more over time. It's kind of the 80-20 rule. I'm not sure if you guys have dug into the data on your customers. For all of kind of the different companies that I've worked for, this pretty much is correct every single time, which is kind of the 80-20, which is that 20% of their users stand for 80% of the revenue, which also means that there's a ton of possibilities when it comes to optimizing for them. Again, if you're married, the longer you're married, the more gifts you get. You don't really get gifts when you're dating, but when you're married, you get Christmas gifts, you get birthday gifts, you get everything, right? So it's kind of sweet. Furthermore, this stat, I'm going to explain it because I put it up before and then I felt like it was quite obvious and then people don't understand it. A 5% increase in retention leads to traditionally anywhere between 12% to 25% increase in profit. But when it comes to 5% increase, I don't fully think people understand what 5% increase means. A 5% increase is not the value of 5 added on top of your current number. So if you have 10% retention, then a 5% increase does not equal 15%. It's 5% of 10%, right? So if you can increase 5% of your existing number, it typically leads to an increase in lifetime value of 12 to 25%. So instead of focusing on optimizing ad spend, again, if you can optimize 5% by retention, then that's going to be a ton more profit to the company than kind of optimizing customer acquisition costs. Furthermore, kind of straightforward, every improvement also improves the virality, or statistically it should improve virality because they stay and use the product for a longer period of time, which also exposes them to the possibility that word of mouth also happens more frequently. and then customer lifetime value, which hopefully makes a ton of sense. Okay, so now we've kind of done some initial build-up to really try to understand the goal of retention, also why it is important. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to dive into a use case, and we're going to try to dissect how retention is used, more specifically for WhatsApp. So WhatsApp is the company or it's the internet company online that has the highest possible retention rate. So currently, when it comes to any company kind of online, for as far as we know, Facebook has been the number one product when it comes to retention. And when I worked in Silicon Valley, then everybody knew that as well. So we knew that, well, nobody can ever beat the retention of Facebook. And everyone kind of just speculated that their retention or their cohort rate was stagnating at somewhere around like 85 to 90%, which means that 90% of every user is daily active on Facebook, which at scale is just insane stats. And then all of a sudden, this little company comes out of nowhere and is the first company to ever actually beat the retention rate of Facebook and do so at scale as well. We're going to look at kind of how they did that and also what it meant for WhatsApp. So here you have the two founders. They look like two big teddy bears, classic Silicon Valley developers. They both worked at Yahoo. Initially, when WhatsApp was started, they didn't really make it into a messaging app. So initially, when WhatsApp started, it was a status tool. So the goal of WhatsApp was simply that they were trying to fix the problem of, okay, I'm going somewhere and I would like the people in my contact book or my friends to know what I'm doing. So it's just a very simple way for you to update your status and then allow for others to see what your status is. Now, that was fine and good, but that really didn't gain too much traction. They had some initial users. What did happen, though, is that Apple launched this new revolutionary concept, which was called push notifications. Push notifications was really kind of a game changer, and in the early days, devs had no clue how to use them. Like, we had no clue what we were just given, so everyone was just like trying push notifications in every single format. And now all of a sudden it's kind of become more industrialized. But what happened is that they added push notifications to the status update. So when a person would update their status, then the people in their contact book would get a push notification with the status update from that person. Now, they took a look at their data and they saw that all of a sudden the users were starting to interact and use the app more than normal. And they decided to kind of look into why that was. And what they found is people stopped using the app to post statuses, and instead they started to kind of just fuck around with their friends. Because what they realized is I can pretty much just write whatever I want in my status and it's going to pop up on all my friends' phone. So all of a sudden people were starting to do just like jokes and spamming messages and everything else, right? So the usage went up dramatically. Now, what happened with the users as well is that people also started communicating. So they were just chatting over it. Now, to fully understand why this was so important and why it was such a game changer, back then, if you guys remember, we had to pay insane amounts of money just to send an SMS cross-country, right? So this was in the old days where like an SMS had just insane prices and everything else. And all of a sudden they found that through WhatsApp, they can kind of use push notifications and they can kind of do like an SMS, but for free. And that's how the kind of messaging started within WhatsApp. So the two founders went, okay, this is super interesting. So what if we actually just use the status tool and then we kind of try to create a competitor more towards SMS? Because all of a sudden, if we can do push notifications and do communication through Wi-Fi and everything else, it's going to be a lot more affordable than doing SMS. And that's how they started. So they decided to pivot and they pushed away kind of the status stuff. And then all of a sudden, people were able to write messages. And then they had that with notifications. And then all of a sudden, it went and got incredible growth. Furthermore, they bootstrapped also for a long time. And they were also actually planning to kind of just bootstrap forever. But if you guys have ever heard of Sequoia Capital is a VC fund. And in Silicon Valley, again, there's like a few venture companies that nobody is allowed to say no to. And Sequoia is one of them. And then Andreessen Horowitz is kind of the other. And then Greylock. So when Sequoia came knocking, Sequoia is the company they've invested in pretty much every huge company you've seen, like all the way from Atari to Stripe to Uber to everything else. Everything they kind of just invest in seems to always just blow up. They decided to invest in WhatsApp. Now, back again, like in the early app days, the way we would monetize apps is we all did the same thing, which was we did really fucking annoying ads, right? So I'm not sure if you guys remember this, but early days of the iPhone, we also did like super shady ads where we would like attempt to click the call to action, and then a fuck you ad would like come right up over the call to action, so you click the ad. So that was the golden days of ads on phones. They decided very quickly they were never going to do ads. And for a messaging app, the main way to monetize was through advertisement. But they very clearly said they were never going to do ads, they're not going to do games, and they're not really going to do any gimmicks. Now, interestingly enough, also at the same time, all the big companies decided to launch their messaging app. So you had Skype, who just ported all their features and launched it as an app. You also had Messenger coming in. And what we're going to look at is basically how these two guys are able to beat Skype and also kind of Messenger. And it's really important to understand, especially when it comes from a messaging app, if you have an initial user base of like 1 million users, or 500 million or 1 billion users, which Facebook has, the fact that you can be beaten by two guys like this is quite embarrassing. Because if you have kind of the initial traction of 1 billion users, you should be able to kind of win the market in a messaging app. So fast forward, they got acquired. So I'm not sure if everybody knows this, but WhatsApp is now part of Facebook. They got acquired for 19 billion. And what we're going to dissect is basically the question of was it worth it, and kind of why they decided to spend that amount of money. To put it in perspective, these cute apps got acquired for this sum, right? So Instagram, Facebook acquired for 1 billion. If you compare it to WhatsApp, it's 19 billion, right? So the scale is just slightly higher. So we're going to see why Instagram got 1 billion and how these guys got 19 billion for their app. And it kind of comes down to this graph. And I'm not sure if people, well, it kind of depends on if people are techy enough. I do very fondly kind of remember the day where when WhatsApp got acquired. And I remember going on Facebook, and it was also the day apparently all of my friends just changed their career and everyone became a business analyst. Because that day, all of my friends had an opinion on this graph and on the acquisition. So like friends from high school all of a sudden were like discussing the $19 billion acquisition. I'm like, you've never, like, who are you? You have no right to comment on this. But they were looking at this graph, right? And what people don't understand about this graph is that you're not looking at the power of user acquisition, you're looking at the power of retention. And we can see this quite clearly in the graph as well. So you see already when it comes to user growth, WhatsApp very clearly dominates, and they dominate quite quickly. This graph, though, is not, again, a result of acquisition. WhatsApp has never actually done any marketing. They've never tried or spent any money when it comes to trying to acquire users. They've just constantly kind of just been focusing on activation and retention, and that's been their focus the entire time. So the reason they have exponential growth while all of these face linear growth is simply because the retention rate is so insanely high that every new user they add just keeps being added on top because their churn rate is so incredibly low. And then what happens when you focus on retention? So these are the last shared numbers of WhatsApp. So currently they're doing 1.2 billion daily active users. So this is not registered users or users that are visiting the app or like page views. These are daily active users, which means that they go onto WhatsApp and they send a message. So every single day there's 1.2 billion people in this planet who decides to go on WhatsApp and send a message. Furthermore, they transmit 60 billion messages per day. And to put that in scope, they currently, or more communication is done over WhatsApp than SMS worldwide. So WhatsApp is currently bigger than SMS, and more people take advantage of WhatsApp rather than traditional SMS, to say something about the scale. And furthermore, they were 55 people managing all of this. And to kind of compare it, we're currently 80 people at Rothschild, and we're kind of not near a $19 billion acquisition, as far as I know. All right, so let's take a look at this guy, the devil. So when it came to the day of the acquisition, this was kind of the statement from Mark Zuckerberg on why they decided to do the $19 billion acquisition. So he said, WhatsApp is the only widely used app we've ever seen that has more engagement and a higher percentage of people using it daily than Facebook itself. It's kind of summed up here why they spent $19 billion instead of spending $1 billion, which is what they spent on, say, Instagram. To make you people really understand why this is powerful, You really just need to understand the concept of time. Every single day, there's 24 hours. The more control a company has of those hours and how you spend them, the more powerful that company is. So it doesn't really matter who we are. We constantly just have 24 hours. It's kind of like a finite resource, which means for a company, if you can control 2 hours of a person's 24-hour daily life, then that is worth a ton of money, especially for companies like Facebook. So all of a sudden, when WhatsApp comes up and they're able to dominate and kind of have a lot of people's time every single day, then that's a huge threat to Facebook, right? So that's a market they definitely want to gain. So essentially what Mark Zuckerberg did is he essentially just made them an offer they can't refuse. And initially, I think the offer would have made sense already at like a $6 billion acquisition, but they ended up at 19. The main reason why they ended up at 19 is because money has a lot of power. The founders did not actually want to sell to Facebook, but I do understand that when you get an offer for $19 billion and all you have to do is just sign, and then you have that in your bank account, it's really fucking tempting. But if we fast forward, both of the founders have obviously left Facebook, and they all complain on the same thing, which is that this fucker keeps constantly trying to dominate the company and is also leaking privacy constantly throughout the entire app, right? So when it comes to WhatsApp in general, one of the main things that they got to good traction is because they do peer-to-peer encryption rather than encryption as a whole. So for the people who don't understand encryption, what this means is that when you're a user on WhatsApp, you have your own encryption key, and then the other person you're talking to has an encryption key. And then when a message is transmitted, we use both those encryption keys to decode and encode the messages between you guys. The issue with that is that because we have the encryption key instead of Facebook, they can't really read our messages, which to them is quite frustrating. So when it comes to, say, Messenger is encrypted, but they're also it's encrypted, but people don't really understand what they mean by encrypted. It's encrypted, but they still read your messages, or they can still browse your messages. It's just at rest, which means in the database, they are encrypted. But Facebook does definitely run machine learning and everything else upon every single message that you do write on the Messenger platform. And they're allowed to because they just don't store your name to the message, so they collect it as demographic data and anonymous data, which means that they're allowed to browse all your messages. So the issue that's essentially happened is that this guy is suggesting that WhatsApp should not be peer-to-peer encrypted anymore, but that Facebook should have the encryption key because users want a more personalized experience that Facebook can provide. Which meant that both of the founders left and they told Mark Zuckerberg to fuck off. And once again, Mark Zuckerberg sits on a new really big company that he controls by himself. Also, this is the story also for Instagram, if you've seen it. Both the founders of Instagram has also left, and they both left for the same reason, which is they struggle with the privacy stuff from Facebook. That's for another time. That was literally just a rant. It has nothing to do with retention. It's just I fucking hate that guy, so I want to spread the hate. Back to WhatsApp though. The question is, how did they actually achieve the retention rate that they did get?
Actually, one question, sorry. So you mentioned the most important thing is time in terms of getting all the value.
For Facebook, yes.
Sorry?
For Facebook, yes.
For Facebook. So like, isn't, don't people spend much more time on YouTube and Instagram than WhatsApp? So like, according to that, should I have to pay more for those platforms rather than WhatsApp?
Sure, or they would be interested to, yeah. The only issue with, say, for example, YouTube is that it's Google. I mean, if you look at the competitors trying to claim time, it's pretty much Facebook versus Google. I mean, YouTube was also a smaller acquisition. YouTube is doing well when it comes to consummation and time spent, but also WhatsApp is doing a lot when it comes to communication. And I would say from a strategic point of view, being the company that controls the communication of the entire world is a lot more powerful than watching, kittens on YouTube.
So how does Facebook capitalize on WhatsApp?
Currently, they don't. So currently, it's not monetized. WhatsApp themselves wanted to monetize it, so they played with for a year. They played with $1 per year, all the way to $5 per year, and that was their goal of monetizing. Now they do not have to monetize because they're part of the strategy of Facebook, which means they don't have a monetization plan. But also this year, and I'm not sure if you guys know, this is going to a fucking sidetrack. This year, WhatsApp is also going to integrate. So WhatsApp is being merged with Messenger and Instagram. That's happening this year. So
I thought I was paying like 99 cents a year something for WhatsApp initially when I signed up.
Yeah.
However long ago. That's not the case still anymore now. I thought that
no. So after Facebook took it over, they removed the pricing.
Oh.
Yeah. No, they A/B tested it. It was like everything from like $1 for like a year forever. Like they A/B tested a ton, but it was basically between the range of like €1 to €5.
But does Facebook still read the WhatsApp messages? Like,
No, they can't because it's P encrypted.
it's not in their power to change it, or
No, it is. And they
so why don't they do it?
no, they're heavily suggesting they might for sure do it. Because they feel like, again, the excuse is they can offer more personalized experience to you. But yes, what's going to happen this year is Instagram is going to come into WhatsApp, and then also Messenger is going to come into WhatsApp, which is pretty much because the government will try to break up Facebook, and then that's a network effect mechanism. That's for another time. All right, back to WhatsApp. So we're going to dissect WhatsApp and why it did work. So we're going to divide it into kind of a few bullet points. The first bullet point and what WhatsApp did really fundamentally right, which again a lot of companies don't really understand or do, is that they focus on the things that don't change. And I'm going to talk a bit about what I actually mean by this. So this kind of initially came from Jeff Bezos and how he describes it, and I found it to be quite interesting. He said that 99% of the conversations about the futures are about what's changing, but on the flip side, it's even more important to really understand what won't change. So I'll put this into an example so you understand what he really is implying here. So when it comes to Amazon's expansion strategy, how they run their entire business, it kind of comes down to this. It's just the question of whether you kind of understand what he's actually saying. So what he actually means is that Jeff Bezos get a lot of questions when it comes to like, what is the future? You know, what's the future of e-commerce? What's the future of the internet and everything else? And everyone is like, AI, machine learning, flat design, all of that shit. They don't really care about that. What Jeff Bezos does and what they do for Amazon is that they ask themselves a question now, which is what will be important now and will continue to be important in the next 5 years for the customer. And if essentially a thing can be answered yes on both of those, then that's what they're going to focus on. So if something matters currently to the users and they're pretty sure it's going to be equally important, if not more important in 5 years, then they're going to invest money into that. And what that means is that they made a lot of strategic choices, which seemed quite dull in the beginning, but now you see really the power of. So say, for example, Amazon is not a profitable business, or they are profitable, but their margins are super thin. The reason is, the question is basically, would a consumer always want the best and most affordable price on an item? Yes. In 5 years, would a consumer still want a very affordable price on items? Yes. And thus Amazon decides to pretty much have their marketing strategy, which is that they have pretty much no profit on top of items. So if you look at their yearly filing, you'll see that their profit margin when it comes to items on Amazon is between 0.5% to 1.5%. Furthermore, they also focus on delivery now. So now more and more people kind of know them as a delivery company. That was never kind of the plan. It just happened because of this again. So the question is, well, if I order an item now, would I want it faster? Yes. In 5 years, will I still want my item delivered to me faster? Yes. And that's pretty much how they decide on their strategy. They don't follow trends. They don't redesign Amazon.com when like a new cool design concept is out. Like currently everyone is using these dumb illustrations of like the people and they're like colored in blue. Mixed Final has it and everyone else, and it looks super silly. They're kind of just stuck to kind of their core values. The same is what WhatsApp did. So when it came to WhatsApp and focusing on the things that don't change, these are kind of 5 points that they decided on and that they've continued to focus on throughout time. So the first one is reliability. So you can see reliability kind of being a huge factor for WhatsApp and also their growth, especially when you look at things like Arab Spring, for example. When it comes to Arab Spring, I would say WhatsApp played a tremendous role in kind of making sure that happened. So what happened during Arab Spring is that the government shut down the telecom providers, which meant that nobody had the option to communicate via SMS. And what a lot of people fled to is WhatsApp because they also offered peer-to-peer encryption, right? So they were able to actually communicate more, or they were able to communicate in a bit more secure way than they were used to be able to do. And to do it at that scale, I also remember to seeing a graph of like active users on WhatsApp, and then they put it in the timeline of Arab Spring, and you see they had insane growth. Because reliability has always been the focus. Furthermore, if you're expecting to send a message to someone you care about, you also always kind of expect the message to be sent to that user. It's kind of privilege that we've got through SMS and everything else, which is if reliability is not there, and then we send a ton of messages on WhatsApp, and then a week later I found out that Jean, for example, never saw the messages that I sent, then that could be quite devastating. Please see my messages. Speed is also incredibly important. Speed is something that's always been their focus. Again, when it comes to the acquisition strategy and the launch strategy, they have always focused on speed. So they want to be the simplest app and the easiest to use app. When it comes to comparison, when they just launched, they were competing versus, say, Skype, which is like the fucking demigorgon of adding features to their app. Like, they add so many features, it's insane, which says something about Microsoft in general. But Microsoft, we can also talk about later. So when Skype launched, they had like video, you could have video sessions, you could have group sessions with video, you could have calls in groups, you could also play games, and you could also upload emojis and animations, right? So that was pretty much Skype when it came out, and they wanted to compete for the messaging space on the iPhone and Android phones, while they kind of just focused on speed, and then they kind of just ended up winning. Like, I think it took 2 years before they even allowed people to talk in groups, which meant that for the first 2 years, you had to do one-to-one communication, and people still did it, even though, say, for example, a group feature would be very common and something that people would expect you to have. Accessibility as well. When it comes to WhatsApp, a lot of people, when they launch a new feature, they start with the concept of like a minimum viable product. They didn't really do that. The founders, Jan Kumpf, is from the Eastern Europe, and kind of what he found is that if he wanted to communicate with his family, then nobody in his family had iPhones. So they understood very quickly that if they want to make WhatsApp actually into a messaging platform that's used by normal people, and not just white males in Silicon Valley who can afford an iPhone, then they would have to kind of make WhatsApp available to normal phones, which back then was Nokia's and Motorola's and everything else. And that actually led to pretty much a ton of their growth. Plus, it also allowed people to more effectively communicate cross borders, right? So people that were, say, for example, first-time immigrants or anything else, they had the opportunity to finally be able to talk to family members and everything else, which was very powerful. Trust and security has also been huge, again, during Arab Spring, and also the notion that they do have peer-to-peer encryption. Interestingly enough, there's been like 1,000 apps that try to focus on peer-to-peer encryption. The issue is that they don't understand that the consumer doesn't give a fuck about peer-to-peer encryption, like that we don't even understand what it is. So they kind of put it not front and center. So when they tried to promote WhatsApp, what they did is they didn't go, we're a messaging app focused on P2P security, which is how I feel like developers would like target their product. And no consumers care about that, right? But they focused on security, but they always had it as kind of like the backbone. That was not the main part of what they kind of wanted to promote it. And then ease as well, which we kind of talk about, is just the general simplicity. And also, if you take a look at the people, say for example, that I currently communicate with on WhatsApp, I have everything from like my little sister who's like 10 all the way to my grandma who's not 10, you know, she's like 80. And they're all able to kind of understand how the app works, which says something for sure about the usability of it. Alright, point 2, single-minded product focus. So we talked about the things that don't change, and the step 2 is that they did focus on doing one thing and doing it extremely well. And you can see this pattern kind of constantly reappearing if you take a look at successful founders, which is their ability to really focus on one thing and then just doing that right for a very, very, very long time. Even though there are other lucrative options out there, they still kind of dedicate their focus. So to put this into an example and kind of into the notion of people wanting to add features and everything else, let's just imagine we're buying cutlery for our house, right? So a lot of you just recently moved to Amsterdam, you go to IKEA and you're going to buy cutlery. Do you buy a Swiss Army knife, or do you kind of just buy a knife and fork? So the Swiss Army knife kind of has everything you want, right? So it should be the better choice, because you do have a knife, you do have like a scissor, you have like a filer that you can like file your nails, kind of say, and then you have just a bunch of others. You have corkscrew and everything else. In theory, if we take a look at how people that work with product think about things, they would say, well, everyone should choose the Swiss Army knife, right? That's how people think about products as well. They're like, okay, well, if we keep adding an additional feature to our product, then the product is going to be more valuable because value equals the amount of features that something has. That's not really the case. That's not how the world works. It's just how people conceptualize things. So in the option of choosing between just buying a normal knife and buying a Swiss Army knife, nobody's going to buy a fucking Swiss Army knife, you know? People just want a knife and they want a fork. They want dedicated kind of responsibility to one item doing one thing and doing that really well. They also understood this, right? So they constantly just focused on doing one-to-one messaging and doing that really well until they decided to expand. All right, number three. Number three is more of a warning. It's basically a warning that I have for you guys when you come back to your company. If you find these people in your company, please try to get them fired. And I'll kind of explain how their mindset works. And then we're also going to see how we can get rid of them. So this is kind of the traditional mindset. I feel like a lot of like head growth people have them, product managers as well. And it's very this kind of like flawed understanding of how product works. And it starts like something like this. This model is pretty much Facebook, you know. All right. First one, deliver value. So when a company starts, they want to deliver value. So you have an idea, and the goal of the idea is that you have a solution, and you want to have a solution that solves a problem. So the goal is to deliver value to users. You start there, and then after you deliver value, the goal is to get an audience. So now you have delivered value, now you want an audience so that you can actually truly deliver that value to that audience. Right? So far, so good. And then the next step is where companies start to fuck up. And then they go, okay, so we delivered value, and we got the audience, so what do we do next? Well, now we have a huge audience. Let's see how we can maximize revenue from this audience. And then once they've maximized revenue from the audience, they lose the audience because the value is gone. So this is kind of the systematic thinking that just leads to really poor product. And it's also the kind of this history of Facebook, right? So they started by trying to deliver value. Their goal of delivering value is that they were able to connect people through using the internet, right? And then they got the audience. And then when they started having the audience, they started to do kind of like bullshit things that we didn't really like, which is, say, for example, with Facebook groups, if you invited, say, all of the users on your app onto your Facebook page, all of a sudden they decided, well, you can't really talk to your users. Like we'll show you, or we'll show the post like 5% of your users, and then if you want to talk to the rest of your users, you're gonna have to pay us money. You know, that's when you go like, what the fuck, that makes no sense. Like I brought them here, I want to communicate with them, and they're like, no, that's gonna cost money, right? That's because they focused on point number two, which is they realized they had an audience, and now they're trying to maximize money by squeezing it out of people. And then what happens is that they lose the audience because the value is gone. What they were focusing on here is no longer the product because they've been trying to maximize the revenue, so they added a feature that focuses more on that rather than kind of on the original mission. So if you have people that kind of have this way of thinking in your product or in your company, we basically just want to say this: stay away, demon, get away from everything that's related to the product. If you can't get them fired, then at least try to get them away from working on the product. Point number 4 is artificial virality. I think it's important to acknowledge the fact that they do have some advantages kind of built in, which is the fact that they are a messaging app. Messaging app does come with built-in virality if it does get traction. What I mean by that is that there's no standalone value if you're simply one user. So there's always incentive to invite and engage with other users, right? So not every app has that. I mean, if you're a SaaS app or if you're in e-commerce, you don't have that advantage. But it also, to counter, makes growing up insanely more difficult because when you have 2 users and you're trying to grow that to 1,000 users, they have literally no one to talk to, right? So the challenge is also incredibly tough. What they did really well, though, is that they understood kind of natural viral components and then they optimized for it. So I'll talk about this because I feel like a lot of people don't focus on this because they don't really think it matters. But what they did is they also focused on the usability and the correlation that that has when people are explaining WhatsApp to their friends. So what I mean by that is if people are to explain Skype to their friend, pretty much all people will explain Skype differently, which means that they focus on different value propositions. So a value proposition that is the most important on Skype varies from person to person. So to me, I might say, well, Skype is a place where you can have group video chats. And then the person I'm talking to goes, well, I'm not really interested in that. I'm looking for like text opportunities to chat with the group. You know, and they still offer that. It's just the value proposition that I focused on is different from kind of what they needed. With WhatsApp, that's never really the case because they focus so much on doing one thing So when people were to describe kind of WhatsApp, they just said, well, it's a text messaging app. It costs nothing, and it's kind of push notifications. And everyone's like, okay, I'll download it. Stability also allowed them to scale. They did focus a ton on scalability initially. If there's any developers, pretty much what they decided to do is they decided to stick with a fairly unconventional language, and they programmed everything on Erlang, which is the programming language made by telecom companies. Functional programming language to the people out here, most don't, I assume. Also, security allows for users to feel safe. The nice part about this is that it's all features that are not seen. So initially I said, I think the best products, or when it comes to the best products, it's also a lot about what isn't there. These are 3 features that are not really seen, but they're for sure thought about and crafted by the product team. And then the 5th point is on focus on originality. So they have their ability to focus on product and not really get distracted by anything else. And what I mean by that is that I feel like a lot of startups, they follow, or they go to like meetups, or if you're like new to growth hacking, you just discovered Neil Patel, and then you like keep reading his shit. Like, don't do that. He knows nothing. Or they go on investor meetings. But what they kind of thought about, and what I find interesting, is that startups keep copying each other, but most startups are really bad, and we don't really see that. But if 99% of kind of startups do a certain action, but also we know that kind of 99% of all startups fail, I don't really understand why we're like trying to do the same thing in a repetitive pattern. But apparently, people think it's a great idea. Their focus was always to increase product market fit. So we'll touch briefly upon product market fit again. You guys have already kind of learned about product market fit. But what they truly focused on was that they would constantly have the result of their product market fit test. And then they would update their result, and their goal was always to go and see if they could have their current product market fit rate and if they could improve that. So their kind of North Star metric for the entire company was always product market fit. And I think interestingly enough, what you see in the new companies that are coming up now that had good growth teams very early on is that this seems to kind of be the new trend. So now a really new popular product that has come up in Silicon Valley is this email provider called Superhuman. Superhuman has done things quite differently. And what they did say is, and I read this in an article, is they pretty much just said, well, what we put as our North Star is our product market fit response rate and what our ratio actually is, and then we just try to improve that. And currently, they're one of the fastest growing companies. So let's just summarize the 5 points that were kind of crucial to WhatsApp and their success. It comes down to focusing on the things that don't change. Again, the stuff that we talked about with Jeff Bezos and Amazon. It's essentially asking yourself the question of, does it matter now and will it matter in 5 years? So take decisions based on that point of view rather than thinking ahead and trying to predict the future and what's going to be trendy. Have a single-minded product focus, so in the option between kind of making a Swiss Army knife because you think more features equals more value, tend to favor the knife because that's what people buy. Be aware of people that fixate on revenue. Again, this is the obsession kind of that comes from Facebook. So in internal product teams, if you have a product team, if they constantly fixate on increasing the revenue, and they do that by trying to add new features or everything else, then please be very wary of it and try to recommend not doing this. And then they also had the artificial virality and the simplicity around it, and the focus on originality. Cool. So now we've kind of done the use case. What we're going to do now is we're going to talk about retention versus acquisition. So initially I talked about the impact of working on bottom of the funnel versus working on top of the funnel. What we're going to see now in an exercise is kind of how that works out using a predictive or a very simple predictive growth model. But before we do that, I have a question. And hopefully you get it right. It's a very easy question, which is which company would you choose? Company A or company B? This is literally not a trick question. Thank you. Company A acquires 5 million users a month. Company B acquires 2 million users a month. I really hope you guys take company A. Company A is right. What we're going to do now is we'll add a stat. So the question is now, again, would you choose company A or company B? Company A has 80% month-on-month retention. Company B has 94% month-on-month retention. So company A gets 5 million new users a month and company B gets 2 million.
It's nearly 80%. I'm going to work on it later on, and we have more to say, maybe calculation.
True. That is true.
Yeah.
But here you can also work on this at 94.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's pretty much company B. Hopefully, people will choose this company. However, I think likely people would always prefer this company. I think that this company would experience a ton of better growth. What we're going to do now is we're actually going to go through the predictive model and see and compare these two companies to really understand what happens, and then also why retention always ends up being kind of the most important part of the funnel. So that's grow.ac/rtcalc. And then you're going to get a spreadsheet. And for that, I just want you to fill in the numbers that you just saw, which is company A has 5 million new users at 80% retention, and then company B at 2 million and 94% retention. And then essentially I have two questions, which is at which month does company B surpass company A? And then the other question is why does company A stagnate? Then we're going to spend just like 5 minutes on doing this.
This is in million, guys. That's 5 and 2. Answer the two questions. Which number and why? That's the fact. Think about the use of that.
Can you add a slide at the end of your retention part 2 to ask them to download Screamer Frog before we do retention?
Yeah. Could you just send it on Slack so I remember as well?
We could just do it now.
No, I'm going to continue.
Are you? Yeah? How are you feeling? It's very engaging. Cynicism is at peak. Sarcasm is at peak. It's good. I'm enjoying it.
Okay, I think we're going to finish the John. John is very engaged. Highly listening. I think we're just going to finish the exercise. Again, it's not a really tough exercise, it's multiplying your numbers. For the first question, which month does company B surpass A? The month is 23, 24-ish. Like, we can just eye measure it, it doesn't really matter. And then why does company A stagnate?
Because the 20% loss retention is bigger than 5 million new users at any point of the growth cycle.
Exactly. So what happens is that if you focus on acquisition, you're going to hit a peak. And if you take a look at the early days of kind of the internet, you will see that a lot of tech companies constantly found this peak and then they kind of just got stuck. Also, when we take a look at, say, social networks, and you had all kind of the predecessors like MySpace and everything else, they all got and hit this roof, and they were not able to outgrow it, which was around the 100 million user mark. And then kind of the way to go and hit above that is you need to improve your retention. So what is essentially happening with company B is that even though every single month they acquire 5 million new users, that's 3 million more each month than company B, because their churn rate is 20%, each month they will also lose 20% of their users. And what's going to happen is they get 5 million new users, 5 million users leave. They get 5 million new, 5 million new users leave. And then they're just stuck in this pattern. And if you think about the top market actually is to acquire 5 million users a month, like I would much rather prefer to work on just having 2 million new users a month, right? We also saw the growth rate for them is really, really strong. So that's just very quickly to explain that even though currently you might focus on acquisition, at scale, every single company is going to have to shift and focus on retention. If not, they're going to hit the roof. Okay, so what is product market fit? So now we've done the exercise. Now we're briefly going to touch upon product market fit and what it really is and how to actually measure it. The definition that I typically have for product market fit are these. It's essentially when you're in a market with a product that can satisfy that market, or if you've ever been to like the US and in Silicon Valley, then these douchebags have this kind of description, which is like, oh, you know it when you have it, bro. Which is pretty much the douchebag answer of like, you're just constantly growing and you can't really focus, and then you kind of just know you have product market fit. This is just really just not valuable though. And this is the part that users don't understand, or people working well don't understand, which is the fact that you can lose product market fit. I think a lot of people or the companies who have run a product market fit survey, what they do is they run it once. If they hit 40%, they go, okay, our company has product market fit, and then they never do it again. And then they kind of just continue on because they go, okay, check. Because in the path, you're like, okay, first thing you need to do is like you need to get product market fit. After you've gotten product market fit, you follow kind of the next steps. It's not really that easy. Like it doesn't follow, or you can't really do that in kind of a step approach. Because what happens is you can very easily lose this. So you might find that you run a product market fit survey, you hit kind of the 40%, and then your product manager decides that it's a great idea to release a new feature, and then all of a sudden you lost product market fit again. The issue is that people don't continuously check their product market fit. So what happens is they check it early on, and then when they see they have it, then all of a sudden people think it's like free-for-all, and they kind of just celebrate and just add as many things as they want to, because they've been able to check the box, they have product market fit. So please understand that product market fit is not a thing you do once, and then you go, I have product market fit. It's something you do continuously. And again, you see this for WhatsApp. So WhatsApp ran product market fit, the questionnaire, once a month, and you'll see companies like Superhuman and everything else, they do it repeatedly every single month to continuously validate that they have product market fit. Furthermore, they're looking to improve their product market fit. So a lot of, if we measure product market fit by the definition of Sean Ellis, which is that 40% answer that they would be very disappointed, then what companies do is that they, as long as they're above the threshold of 40%, they don't optimize for it. So they think 40% is the same as 50%. It's not really. The stronger product market fit you can have, the better it is. So if you have a product that is 50% kind of product market fit, then having and optimizing and getting 70% is actually worth the time. It's not like you hit 40% and then everything above it doesn't really matter, because it's just, yes, you have product market fit. So do understand you can continue to optimize your product market fit even after. Also you can also be $1 million business and have a lot of employees and revenue without having product market fit. So I'll give an example. After my first company, I jumped on and became head of growth at a company called StudyPool, which is kind of this academic marketplace in the US. So people can submit questions they have about homework onto the marketplace, and then what's going to happen is that Ivy League students will bid on answering that question. So essentially, you could just post a question, and then a Harvard student will basically go like, okay, if you pay me $30, I will do this shit for you. We were currently earning yearly revenue of around $4 million, and we did not have product market fit at all. Like when I came in, the product market fit was not that strong. I think on the first product market fit survey I did, I think we got 20%, and we should have had 40. And if you've ever worked on trying to improve your product market fit, then you know that 20% is really, 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 really fucking low. Like you're nowhere near. Like there's so much work that needs to be done. But we were still able to earn a ton of revenue. The thing with this is that money and revenue does not mean that you have product market fit. It could also just mean you have really good salespeople, or that we just spent and did customer acquisition quite well. And that was kind of the use case for us. Like we were able to acquire users at a very good rate and at a very good price, but we for sure didn't have product market fit. So we were just washing through users, right? So then my goal was to improve this.
Yeah, so what if you have a product that's mostly based on something incidental or something that happens once in your life? For example, like if you get married or something, you have
I like that you think it happens once in your life.
Nice
great to
guy.
know for.
Aww.
But so what about so most people who've used it, they won't be really sad if it cannot use it again, right?
Okay, I'm just trying to get in. Can you give me an example that's not marriage?
Yeah, so for my company, it's for example when you have okay, so they this lawful rent cost. So if you start renting a house, what is the broker cost for that? So you most people will have it once in their life, I think. So if you have that, so then people have bought the product, done it once, they probably will never use it again. How do you define
Continuous product market fit.
Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, good question. So what I meant when I said that every single month you do a product market fit questionnaire, do it with new users. So then you don't do it on the same user twice. We did do that though. We did recycle it, and then we did it once a year. So if you've done product market fit, we would send it again next year. Then every single month we would do it for new users. That way we can kind of like double guard ourselves for new users and old users. But this is plainly I do for new users.
Yeah.
Typically also the moment when you want to ask a product market fit survey is when they've done an action or what you define as retention twice. Is kind of the typical place of that's the trigger of when you want to send people a product market fit survey. Because I feel like a lot of people don't understand when to send a product market fit survey. And it's not that obvious until you actually have to send one, and then you go, okay, but when do we actually send it to new users? Because if you send a product market fit survey the second they sign up, they haven't really tried the platform yet. The most common way and the way I've approached it is I always do it after they perform the second or the core action 2 times, then I fire up this.
Sorry, and how do you measure it? How do you get a score? Are there specific templates to measure that?
Yeah, it's coming in 2 slides.
Oh, okay.
A lot of startups don't get product market fit. If you take a look at here, the main reason that startups do fail is that there is no market need. What that means is that I also think a lot of people, especially founders, we're quite good at knowing what we should do, but then still not doing it. And what I mean by that is that I feel like every founder knows they should do a product market fit survey. And then if you actually ask them if they've done it, then you'll find like pretty much none of them actually have done a product market fit survey.
Is that just because they're like afraid of the results, or?
For sure. Because I can speak for myself as a founder, your startup is very much your baby. And you're scared of the results. It's the same thing when people say if you take a look at any startup video from all these successful founders, they all have the same advice, which is talk to your users. You've heard it so many times, and then you go back to your computer and you're like, tomorrow, and then you continue. So it's like a very obvious thing. Again, if you just want to avoid this, just run the survey. Again, if you have founders in your company who say that the company has product market fit, ask to see the survey, and you'll quite quickly probably find out they never run a survey. They just have a feeling, or they go like, okay, but we have enough users or we have enough revenue that we have product market fit. That's not how product market fit works, so then please run the survey as well. Here is the template. So there used to be a really good template at survey.io where they allowed you to run the product market fit test. That page is no longer available. So what I've done is I've kind of ported and duplicated the questions that used to be there to test product market fit, and then I've created a type form that kind of shows you the questions that are quite common to ask in a product market fit survey. The number one question and kind of the definition of product market fit is this question, right? Which is, how do you feel if you can no longer use, and then the name of your product, and then you have these options, which is very disappointed, somewhat disappointed, not disappointed, or not applicable. I'm no longer using the product. The definition of product market fit here is that you want 40% of all your users to have answered very disappointed. If they don't answer, or if the answer is not above 40%, you do not have product market fit. So I'm also going to give you an example where people will try to negotiate that they have product market fit, which is when they have like very disappointed, they have like 20%, and then they have 70% somewhat disappointed. And then they try to like negotiate product market fit. They're like, yeah, but a lot of users say somewhat disappointed. mean, it's really close, so maybe we do kind of have product market fit. No, it doesn't really work that way. These answers are grouped by the same value. They do not mean anything. It does not really mean anything if 70% of the users are somewhat disappointed or if they're not disappointed. The value that you're providing or the value that you need to provide to go from somewhat disappointed to very disappointed is huge. So please understand that. So if you think you're doing really good because here you have 10% and again here you have 80, then you're actually doing really, really, really bad, and then a pivot or something would kind of make sense.
Does it happen a lot that the trainees from here do the product market fit survey at their companies and that they get like less than 20%?
Less than 20. Less than 20 is possible. Typically, I would say for traineeship company, they have slightly above 20 to product market fit. But yeah, I would still, to me, just from my own experience, if your result is like 25 to 30%, there's a long way to go. Like that's something that I would, as a founder, I would say, okay, this should be quite a high priority.
Okay.
Mirella.
Yes, I just wanted to answer your question. I don't know about the specific percentage, but one of my trainees actually did the survey and found out that she didn't have product market fit. I mean, their company didn't have product market fit, even though they were operating in 4 different countries.
Wow.
And they actually do have a problem with retention as well.
Yeah.
So,
Who would have
that's a
thought?
good indication.
Thank you.
Yeah, we're trying to fix that. The more trainees we have, the more we control if you guys have payments before you come. The company is not you.
Any more questions? Yeah.
How can you do the survey or the, like the PMF survey for in case if the user and the buyer is not the same person, like in this case from my company? Part is the buyer and the kid is the user, and then like I don't think you ask them if they could use it. It's not like them being product users. So.
Sure. So then I would say you have account retention and you have user retention. The person making the purchase is account retention, and then the person engaging with the product is the user. So then I would direct the product market fit question toward the person using the product rather than the person buying the product.
But if it's a small child,
Yeah.
using the product and cannot answer the question.
Exactly.
Okay.
If you
Yeah.
put like spaces.
Also, if the user is an animal, you can also not.
Then you would do
If it's a kid, then I would go for account retention because you simply don't have the ability to do user retention. But also, if it's a kid, then I would say that the user retention is probably also the parent because they don't really understand the kid themselves. So a lot of the times they just look for their own value. But yeah, so pretty much user retention by default. If you don't have the ability to use user retention, then you default to account retention. Few metrics kind of matter if you don't have product market fit. When I step in a set of growth, the first survey and the first thing I always do is I run product market fit survey, and then I basically understand quite quickly where we are in the process. If we have product market fit, then I will actually start doing growth. And if we don't have product market fit, then I'm more of a head of product person until we get that. There's no point in kind of pursuing a scaling phase until we have product market fit, because the churn rate is going to be high, that the value is not really there. You're just going to be kind of just repeating and kind of cleaning the same bucket in and out.
Sorry, you said we should continuously do product marketing for new users, right? How often would you recommend doing that on a yearly basis?
I did it once a month.
Once a month?
Yeah, so then I would do like the newly signed up users in that month. So say like end of January, I would send it to all the new users in January.
Like an email?
An email and then with a link to the pipeline.
Is that same with a B2B company? Would you have to do that out once a month?
Yeah.
Really? Okay.
But again, it's for new users, so an existing user would never see that email twice.
Okay.
Also, I would segment in the fact that they should have done the core action twice. Because if you just do it to a user who just signed up, they don't have any understanding truly of the product yet. So they should have been exposed to the product twice. That would be my trigger. Cool. If there's anyone working in kind of an early stage company, then you don't really have the opportunity yet to run a product market fit survey. So typically what I say is that if you have less than like 100 to 200 active users, I would actually probably say just less than 100. I think with 200 you can, if the response rate is high enough that you get enough replies. But what you would do instead of a survey is you will do manual outreach. And what I mean by that is that instead of doing a product market fit survey, you will just talk to the user and try to get an understanding through conversation of kind of what your product market fit ratio is. Typically the way I do this, because I feel a lot of people that want to talk to their users, they don't really, they're not fully able to convert them. So they're never able to kind of like understand how to book an appointment with a user to talk about their product. The way and kind of the template that I use is that I basically just pamper them and I tell them they're really important. And so I go like, okay, thank you so much for signing up for Studyful. You're a really valuable customer because we've seen kind of based on your actions that you're kind of doing what we want you to do. And furthermore, I think that you as a really powerful user might sit on a lot of insight that we have not kind of thought about for the platform. So I think you can really make a positive contribution to this if you would like to. That's how I phrase it. I basically just pamper them and make them focus on the ego and that they might sit on a ton of valuable insight we might, if we're lucky enough, can kind of take advantage of.
And you found a subject line that works pretty well, any chance?
Typically, I do kind of like vague subject lines. Typically, like with a question that kind of doesn't make sense. So I would do like for product market fit, I would go like, what do you think? Question mark. And then that's kind of like my subject line. Typically, those do quite well. Which are these like, they're not really clickbait. They're kind of vague, but they really pique curiosity. And that's typically kind of the standard subject email lines I go for things like this.
Sorry, is this for the stage when the product is not on the market at all? To understand the product market fit?
Yeah, this is basically if you just have very few, say for example you have 3 customers currently, then doing a product market fit survey will not give you proper results. So then I would default to this.
But then you ask those 3 customers, sorry, did you ask those 3 customers or you ask some potential customers?
About this I would do for existing customers. Because you're doing user research.
So we also have retail stores, only 2, but and also B2B, where we sell a product, but our e-com channel is like, pretty small. So would I start a question, bring my customers on our e-com, or also B2B and in our retail shops? What do you think?
I would divide them into like 3 customer segments and do it for each of them. And compare them.
Yeah, thanks.
Cool. All right, so now we've kind of discussed product market fit. So please understand that product market fit, it can change and try to update it continuously. Again, this is a super small thing that's going to give you a tremendous advantage when you work in growth. Because most companies, truly, they do not do this, even though it seems very obvious when I say this. So they have no clue on their current status when it comes to their product market fit. So the next part is we're going to discuss how we're going to measure retention. So now I feel like we're finally actually going to dig in and properly see how we can measure this and actually work with retention. Have any of you kind of been exposed to the concept of a churn graph or a cohort? Any of you have kind of the retention graph that looks like this? Have anyone ever seen a retention graph? Not too far. That was a joke, not really. So this is the classic retention graph. When we describe retention, this is kind of what we look at. So what we have here is we have the days from acquisition, or it could be days, it could be a week, it could be a month, and here you have the number of active users, right? So you end up with a graph that kind of starts at 100%, and then hopefully it experiences this kind of flat outline. So you can go in kind of different variations. You can have like here, then typically the graph goes somewhere like this, right? Or here, if you're really good, we might just go here, or if most apps I would assume goes like this. So they get a slope and they slowly trend towards 0, which means that, say for example, in 6 months from now, the users that you acquired 6 months, the users you acquired 6 months ago, they're gone, so you need to refill the bucket, right? So if you're slowly doing this, which if you look at your retention graph, please do, you will see that this is most companies. It kind of just depends on how fast they go to 0, but most companies have a graph that does trend negatively towards kind of the 0 point.
Sorry, small question. So this is basically the mirror effect of the churn rate.
Mm-hmm.
So the churn rate will be exactly the opposite, it will be just kind of going up in the same proportion, let's say.
What do you mean?
Like, is it just the opposite effect of how users, so this shows the retention, but then if it would be a churn rate, it would show the
It shows the churn rate. I mean, churn rate shows the concept of retention. Retention shows the concept of churn.
Okay.
So this means, or if we go like here, this means that on day one you had 100% of the users, and here you're at like 10%, so you've lost 90%, right? So here you're losing users, and then stagnate, or here you're losing users over time, and then it goes towards zero. So people call it churn graph, retention graph. You also have the concept of a cohort and everything else. But this is typically how growth people work with retention. So they take a look at this graph, and then what you're looking for is like you pray for this, which is stagnation. This is pretty much realistic. And then they look at this graph, and then the issue is most growth actors go, okay, what now? So they see this graph, and you see this, and then if you ask the question, okay, but how do we fix this? People have no clue. Because this graph doesn't really tell you anything besides the fact that you should be hopefully kind of improving retention for your company. So here, this is when people kind of get nervous, and they go like, what about a feature? Like, let's launch something new. Please don't do that. And also what we're going to see is we're going to kind of trend away from this graph, and we're going to kind of make it into a more actionable framework where we can actually work on retention itself. This graph is really good for stakeholder management or just looking to get a very quick overview. So you can go like, okay, our retention is good, and then if you're doing reporting, then that's kind of all you need. You can do this graph. If you work on retention, then this is way too simple. Like, it tells us nothing, right?
Sorry, one thing on the actual previous thing, like you mentioned that you should test new users. How long after they use the platform should we aim on them?
2 actions.
2 actions?
Yeah, so after they've done the core action twice, then I would send the survey. Or at least, as long as they've at least done it twice.
Core action, you mean like, I don't purchase something or...
Whatever you define as retention, that thing twice. Because it's so hard for me to like get e-commerce. If you buy a pair of shoes twice, then you get the product market fit survey. But it's so hard to give an example because then people will go like, yeah, but I'm not in e-commerce. And then I'm like, yeah, I know, but it's basically repeating the core action twice. The most important thing about retention is that you want this churn graph to flatten. If you are really, 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 really lucky, then you can also have an upward trending retention graph. And it's kind of just like a myth that exists, at least in like, kind of like Silicon Valley, we're like, okay, I don't think that actually exists. Then I got to see it because the last company where I was head of growth, the Breadbox, the Norwegian company, we had a positive trending retention graph, which meant that over time our retention went up. How's that possible? I'll tell you. So that's also the case for Uber, for example. So I'll tell you how you might have an upward trending retention graph. What happens is that, say, for example, you have 100% of users coming here, and then you experience a period of stagnation, and then, say, for example, if you're Uber, you decide to launch in a new city. So what might happen is that the people who you lost here now experience more value from the product, so they come back here, and then they start using the product again. And that's how you might experience a positive trending retention graph. Again, I've seen it once with my own eyes, and I really didn't believe it when we got it. The only companies that I've kind of heard that has this has been Uber, and they got it just because they have it kind of naturally built in with their expansion strategy. You know, like the value when Uber was only in San Francisco is kind of okay, but then all of a sudden when they start adding countries and now they kind of have a dominating market, then it makes sense that the people who left simply because it was only San Francisco are not coming back. But the question is also the people that are coming back has to be more than the people churning as well. So it's quite weird. So typically we just say that what you want is flattening the curve or as close as you can to getting it to flatten. And then kind of trend towards zero is what 80% of companies have, and it's the most common thing that you want to get here. So before we can create a cohort or we can create a churn graph, there is one concept that we need to understand, which is the product usage interval. And it's essentially the axis that defines if we measure our retention on daily usage, hourly usage, yearly, quarterly, monthly. The question is kind of, does it even matter? And then also, how do we actually measure this? Because a lot of companies just kind of, they make it up. They're like, we're a SaaS company, and thus we're monthly. And it doesn't really work that way. And it's also quite dangerous if that's kind of how you're just making your decision. So we're going to talk about finding the product usage interval and why it matters. So product usage interval is quite important. It's what you basically define when it comes to defining the time. Here's an example of kind of how a graph might look depending on just what you define as the product usage interval. So say, for example, that the product that we have has daily user retention, but we don't perceive it that way, so we measure it as weekly retention. Then our actual retention graph is this, but when we look at it, we see this, right? So we have shit retention, but we think we have really good retention, which means that when you or the head of growth or anything else is deciding which part to focus on, then you guys are not going to focus on retention when it's really critical because you're about to kind of go down. So that's the issue. Also, it's the opposite, right? So say, for example, if you have weekly retention, but you measure it in daily retention, it's the opposite. So you're doing better than you actually think you are. So it's incredibly important to get the concept of the time definition correct so that you also are able to focus on the right part of the funnel at the right time. Again, these are the same numbers, just measured differently, one in daily, one in weekly. There's two ways to find product usage interval. It's the way I do it, which is this, cumulative distribution function. By me doing it, I've never done this, I don't understand shit of this. It just looks really smart, so I want to do this. I actually do this, and this is what we're going to go for as well. So this is the super scientific Bernardo doing AI way. We don't trust that. We're just going to go with the good enough way, which is kind of the growth hacker mindset. So the question is, okay, well, how do we actually calculate it? The recipe was basically, we get the median length between a user repeating a core action, and then based on that, you can add it. So I'll show you with an example. So when you want to understand product usage for your app, you will kind of just follow this recipe. So you identify all the users who has repeated your core action within a window of 90 days. After you've done that, you measure the time that it takes them in days from the first time they complete the action to the second time they complete the action. And based on that, you calculate the median length between all the users. So say, for example, if the amount of days between completing the action the first time to the second time is 3 days, we would call it daily retention. You just don't have good daily retention yet. You still have daily retention. If, for example, we say that it's 25 days, then we would call it monthly retention, right? So depending on the days we see, we can adjust it to daily, weekly, monthly, quarterly, yearly, whatever kind of suits the business side. The reason that we get the median, does anybody know why we get the median instead of why we get the average?
So the average is biased by the streams. Like if you have like a very high value, you will make like an imbalance to your average.
Yep. So if you guys remember early on when we talked about account retention and everything else, then a lot of the times, a lot of the retention comes from 20% of the users. So if you guys get the average, then you might kind of get screwed. Because what's going to happen is you probably have power users, and these power users do and perform these actions a lot more repetitively than your average user. So if you calculate the average, your product usage interval is going to be skewed and not really correct. And that's why we get the median instead of getting the average. So please kind of understand that as you're doing the calculation as well. So what we're going to do now is I briefly just want to test if you guys understand the concept of product usage interval. So I'll basically show you a company and then just scream out daily, or whether or not it's like daily, weekly, monthly, quarterly, once every red moon, I don't know. Facebook. Daily, right? So initially it started off as monthly. So initially when they did their filings and their yearly reports, they would measure user activity on a monthly basis. And then next year they decided to measure activity basis on a weekly basis. And then the growth team kind of nailed that. And then they went down to daily. And I would kind of guess now internally that they even go for hourly, which is their new metric. Which the reason is basically if you can optimize the product usage interval, the usage interval will push down in days, which means you can redefine it as well. Yes, Mirella?
Yes, but now they're reporting, I think, the monthly, the daily active users across all of their platforms publicly, instead of just on Facebook because that's going down. So they want to like make it look good.
I like the cash up. Keep it up, you know. Good contribution, fuck Facebook. Okay. Next company, Amazon.
Monthly.
Hourly, daily, monthly. Yearly. Okay, so we have everything from hourly to yearly. Quite the big spread. Okay. Okay, let's define Amazon first. So let's do Amazon, the marketplace, where the place you purchase items. So somebody will be like, yeah, the AWS. Like, don't be that type. The marketplace, where you buy good.
Weekly.
Monthly, weekly, daily. I don't know. I would probably do monthly. I would think like the power users drag it down towards daily and weekly, but I would assume the average user is monthly.
Yeah, I think because you have money every month, so you can spend money every month.
Again, like there's no right answer. It's more like for the purpose of just discussing it. It could be weekly. I'm not sure. It could be daily as well. But kind of the right way to think about it at least. Okay, the Google Suite.
How is it?
Nice. The trick question. Nobody said monthly. Good. So Google Suite, good example of account retention versus user retention. The account retention is monthly, which means that it's built on a monthly cycle. The usage, however, is not monthly, right? So this is pretty much, I would say, like daily when you count the Google Suite plus Gmail. It's on a daily usage. The issue here, and kind of especially for the people who are in a SaaS, this is the most common mistake, which is that SaaS companies think their retention is measured monthly because their billing cycle is monthly. That's the number one mistake. Do not kind of follow into that. Billing cycle does not equal product usage info. So daily, but their monthly billing cycle or their billing cycle is monthly. Instapage. Trick question. You were also supposed to say never, and always focus on bottom of the funnel. No, I'm kidding. Yeah, monthly. I would say weekly probably for like an active marketing team that use Instapage. They use it on a weekly basis. Like here, I would say we use it like daily to a weekly basis for sure. Again, it doesn't really matter if it's monthly or weekly. It's just for the purpose of the exercise. So the main takeaway is to really understand that billing cycle does not equal product usage interval and the difference. So again, Google Suite is a good example. Furthermore, Instapage also, it's monthly bill, but the usage interval is kind of different. So what we're going to do now is we're going to go back to the graph after a break. And this is the only break throughout the deck. And then after this break, we're going to finish off, and then we're going to dive into the framework. So let's do... Huh? No, we're not. It's going to go over time. We're like 10, let's do 10 minutes. 10 minutes.
But then we'll have lunch in like 12:30.
Yeah, but it's not going to be 12:30.
But we can't really have lunch at another time because we have...
12:31. Okay. Which I need.
Courses going on at the moment, so we have to have lunch on time. So let's just go through to 12:30, have lunch.
Sure. I mean, I apologize for your brains, but we can continue. Then we just go all the way to lunch. Let's speed through this. We have 30 minutes. We're going to go over time for sure. I'm going to go faster though. Okay, retention graph for dummies. Again, this is kind of retention graph for dummies. This is the classic graph that we see. Daily active users or daily users, and then a timeline here. Here it's mentioned on a weekly basis. Now, if we want to work on this, you can kind of divide it into different steps. The first thing that you have to understand when it comes to working on retention is what people in kind of the retention industry focus on is what we call week one retention. Week one retention is probably the most powerful kind of thing to focus on in retention, and typically what we spend most of our time focusing on because it's also where the biggest value is. Week one retention is essentially a study, and the study's done both in B2C and B2B. And what they found is if you're able to improve the retention rate in week one, it's going to have a positive impact on the entire retention rate. So it's going to cascade and apply for the entire graph, which means that if you can make this shift from up here to here, the entire graph will also move upwards, which means that there's a lot of things to kind of gain from optimizing week one retention. So you might find that it looks something like this, right? So if you're able to improve initial retention, then it's going to cascade and have this effect throughout the entire graph. So when it comes to working on retention, especially initially, what we tend to work on is what we call week one retention, which is you have like the first week of the user kind of engaging with your product, and you try to really make them kind of engage and really understand the value and get it all kind of settled for the rest of the period. So this is mostly where people spend their time. If we're going to take a look at some of the things that you can kind of do to improve week one retention, these are some of them. Better onboarding, user onboard with Samuel Kulik is kind of like a nice resource where he dissects different onboarding things. It's very much also educational for the people who have not really worked with product before. And kind of the scary thing, especially in Europe, is that we don't really focus that much on product teams yet. which means that the people building products are not really product people. It's typically like the founders or developers or just designers. So here you're going to be able to kind of see a product person dissect how you should create a product and how you should create an onboarding experience. I think also if we take a look at kind of the way products and companies are evolving, I think copywriting is playing an increasingly higher and higher role when it comes to us deciding to engage with a product or not. So there's a book called On Writing Well, which is probably my favorite book. I've read it quite a few times. What it does is that it's made by an author, and what you're going to be able to see is this kind of like meta reading. He talks about how he basically crafts and edits a book, and then he talks you kind of through his own thinking process as he's editing, and then you get to see the edits. It's kind of meta, but it's quite nice. And then segmented new user experience. A lot of the companies don't really do this. It's quite an easy win, which is simply that when you have a new user, you give them kind of a simplistic user experience rather than exposing them to all of the features at once. So you will see this kind of be done poorly by typically SaaS companies. So say, for example, you register for SaaS and then you sign up and then all of a sudden you get like mental, like just fuck up with a ton of these different dashboards, right? So you come into the product, you never used it before, and then you have like 16 links in a sidebar that's called like dashboard, user management, account management, settings, import, export, and you're like, what the fuck is all of this, right? So what you want to do is for the new users, remove the stuff they don't really care about and create a simplistic kind of version that focuses on getting them to the core action. And then over time, you can expose them to what we would call power features. Like a company that does this really well is Netflix. So Netflix, the first goal is that once you sign up, they want you to watch a series. And then over time, as you get exposed to watching series, you will be able to take advantage of what they would call power features, which is, for example, the ability to click on a series and click on, say, for example, series related to this one. That's a power feature. A new user, you don't really give a shit about the fact that you can click on a series and watch related series, right? You're just wanting to watch a movie or a specific series that you have in mind. Yes?
Can you recommend maybe one tool from the analytics tools to analyze by cohorts?
Yeah. So that's part 2. After lunch, we're going to go and review every possible tool and talk about like how to do it. Also in the exercise, we're going to do this. So you're going to be kind of very much hands-on. So we have week 1 retention. And then after that, we have the concept of midterm retention. Week 1 retention is, again, the first week. Midterm retention is where we start to experience stagnation in the graph. So it's kind of this period, right? So where we start to see kind of this trend and this slope forming. That's what we call midterm retention. If we want to focus on midterm retention, there are things that we can do. Typically, what people try to focus on is concepts made by this guy, which is the concept of hooked. You can also kind of apply different models. This book, I liked it initially, but now it's so fucking overused that every like growth marketer talks about the book that I'm not really that fan of it anymore. But it's basically just like psychological principles of creating triggers. It's external triggers, internal triggers, motivation, and everything else. If you guys have ever studied like psychology or read psychology or gamification principles, it's pretty much this stuff. So the book is The Hooked by Nirial. Again, messaging for midterm retention is extremely powerful. What I mean by this is that it also comes down to product features and everything else. So this is the point where you might actually try to declutter your product rather than add features. So I'll give you an example of what I would call like a very stupid features that product people think is good, which is, say, for example, in an e-commerce store, and you perform a search, and then in the search you have the opportunity to choose between grid mode versus list mode. So list mode is that you get products like this, and then grid mode is with a picture, right? So that feature to me is just the complete definition of a user feature nobody gives a shit about. Users want you to kind of decide the action that is best for them. They don't really care about that stuff. And every single action that you add onto the product, the complexity of the product and the education that you have to give to the user to understand those features increase exponentially, right? So again, this is kind of the path where we want to see if we can simplify instead. And then long-term retention. Long-term retention is kind of this path after the slope has gone down and we hopefully experience stagnation or the slope trending towards 0. Long-term retention, really what works here is removing friction and then also improving accessibility. So for removing friction, what I mean, just kind of what I talked about, try to see if you can declutter features and everything else. Improving accessibility, also kind of the same pattern if you want to try to attempt an upward trending retention graph. So this could be, for example, if you are on desktop and all of a sudden you launch a feature that allows people to also use and engage with your app through mobile. That way you might be able to kind of affect the long tail. Again, I do recommend to work on week 1 retention always before exploring midterm and long term. It's just if you work in a huge company or where there's a huge growth team, then you might also find that you have different growth teams working on different parts. So you might have one retention team working on week 1, one on midterm, one on long term. So that's why I'm kind of going through all of these, but do default to week 1 if you can. And then another kind of focus area in itself is to see if you can flatten the curve. This is kind of the number 1 goal with retention, which is like, how do we flatten this? How do we currently have this? How do we make it go this? If this is what you currently have, then this is also your number 1 kind of goal with retention. Because this means that at every X month, literally all of these users are lost and the marketing team will have to reacquire them, which means a ton of money lost, right? So we're looking for this stagnation where a user base can kind of stick on for a certain period of time, and that's how you gain compound growth, right? So every single month, the layer and the current user base is built on the foundation of the past one. For flattening the curve, feature refinement, what I mean by feature refinement is that it's also kind of called positioning. It kind of depends on how you call it. Feature refinement could just be that you have one way of engaging with the feature, and it might be that the user wants to engage with that feature in a completely different way. And an example of that would be, say, for example, if people would like to engage with your content, then all of your content is currently in text, and what they prefer is video. That's a feature refinement. The content and the feature is still the same, it's just the positioning of the feature is done differently. So you might also find that you're quite close to product market fit. If you're quite close to product market fit, I would also recommend looking into feature refinement, as that might be kind of the last thing that's holding you back. Retention hooks as well is something you can do here. Product quality in general, kind of like an obvious advice. And then you can also start working on resurrection. And we're going to discuss that soon. We're fucked on time, but soon. Also a really good resource, grow.ac/say-no. This is a landing page made by Intercom. I feel like it could have been made by me as well, because it must be one cynical bastard who also made this. But it's essentially a page that allows product managers to understand how often they can actually say no to feature creep. So a lot of the times when people want features, it's also people who are not really allowed to have an opinion on features, in my opinion, which is like people in like marketing or operations or everything else. Like if they ask for a feature, then you should default to no. But people typically go like, oh, but if we add this feature, then we will close this huge lead, or we will close this huge customer if we add this one feature. Then on the page they basically go, this means you should say no. Absolutely do not kind of make one feature for one customer, right? So here basically if you just want to read up on how to decline people from adding features, they kind of go through like the top 10 most common kind of ways of people trying to persuade you to add something and then tell you how to say no and why you should say no. So it's just like a fun resource. And also when in doubt, don't make features. Again, the kind of the goal of the retention deck is please, if you want to work on retention, don't think of adding features. All right, segmenting retention. The summary is that active users is essentially too vague. So this retention graph is all good. It's good for stakeholder management, and that's kind of it. So I'm not trying to like bash on the graph. It has its use case. It's just, it's not really what we want to use when we want to actively work on improving retention. Because again, this doesn't really tell us anything. Like I have no clue how to work with this. So we want to try to make it a bit more applicable. So what we're going to do is we're going to say, okay, goodbye to this graph, and then we're going to apply again the framework that is kind of commonly used in the big growth teams. And it's very much used by Airbnb, Pinterest, and Twitter as well. So we're going to discuss the framework and how it looks. This is essentially the framework. So it's called the Retention Lifecycle Framework. It looks like this. Currently it might look slightly complicated, but then hopefully in like 10 minutes this will look quite easy and you'll understand what it means. Then we'll walk through it. There's basically a definition of different user segments. And then based on the different user segments, we're going to perform different actions and treat them differently. All right, so let's dive in. So first thing we need to do when we're going to work with retention is we want to divide them into different segments. The first segment that we want to divide users into is what we call the new user segment. The new user segment has, and is defined by their presence in what we call the current interval. So this, what you're seeing here, is a timeline. The timeline is defined by the product usage interval. So in kind of, for the sense of trying to explain kind of the different segments, I'm just going to assume that we're an e-commerce company and that we're also on a monthly product usage interval to kind of make this a bit more easy to understand. A new user is present in the current interval. That means that they've performed the action we want them to perform in the current month. So say in the example that I'm in e-commerce, that means that this month a new user has gone onto my e-commerce store and they've purchased a pair of shoes. That would define a new user. They're not present in the last interval. The last interval is last month. If you're on weekly, last interval is last week. It's pretty much just the one prior. So the new user is not present in the last interval, last month, because they were not really a new user. Like they were not present, they might have signed up here, but the first kind of signal we have for retention is this one. And also the past is anywhere after the prior month. So maybe 10 years ago they made a purchase, maybe 3 months ago they made a purchase. It's kind of just defined as the past. So that's how the timeline works. The new user is only present in the current interval. That means that they've done the purchase in this month. The way we work with this segment is we try to do things like this. So what we have now is we have a user segment and we kind of have the moments after they've kind of done the first core action. Or in the sense of marriage, they just said yes, and now you're like, okay, well now what? What do kind of married people do? The takeaway with this segment, if you want to optimize for new users to increase the retention for them, is that you want to make it easier to come back. And I'm going to show you some example of what this means and how people apply it. If you're in an e-commerce, you might still have a promise that you have to deliver on, which is kind of just a caution. So say, for example, you track the completed purchase, but you don't track it by the fact that the shipping has arrived, then you might still have a promise to deliver on, which is the fact that the package and what they purchase still needs to be in good condition when it goes to the user. For everyone else, it kind of doesn't matter. But what we want to do, again, we just want to make it easier to come back. We can do that several ways. We can pre-fill data, we can store data, or we can kind of use email marketing and everything else. Typically, the format of what you see for companies working on the new user segment and how they leverage it is things like this. Say, for example, on Uber Eats, you have the ability to click reorder. Anybody use that feature? Yep. I have used it as well. It's super easy. Essentially, what it allows you to do is that you can go back on the Uber app, you can take a look at past orders, and you can click reorder, and then on clicking on reorder, it's going to order the same food that you've ordered from the same restaurant and deliver it to the same address that you were on and automatically charge your credit card. So you just click one button and they simplify every single step. So this is a perfect example of simplifying the core action, right? So the initial time, it was quite tough because you had to sign up, you had to add your address and everything else. But if you want to do the exact same action one more time, now all of a sudden it's incredibly easy. So the goal is to see if from the first time they take the action to the second time they take the action, if you can make that even simpler. Another example is Amazon's buy now with one click. So they've had the patent on the one-click purchase for like 10 years, no, 15 years. They patented one-click concept in like 1998, I think. Nobody's really been allowed to use the one-click button, which has sucked for e-commerce store because this is quite easy to implement. But they've kind of had the patent on it, but now it's expired, and now you see like Bol and everything else, they do buy now with one click. This is kind of the same thing, right? So here you have the option to click or to purchase something with one click. It will automatically kind of suggest the address, they will charge your credit card and everything else. So performing the core action is always easier the second time than it is the first time. And then you also, through activation, you strive to make it incredibly easy the first time. So that's the new user segment. After the new user segment, you have another segment which is called current users. Current users are defined by their presence in the current interval, which means that this month, again in the example of the e-commerce store, this month they made a purchase on the e-commerce store. Furthermore, last month they've also made a purchase. So these users are kind of users that are on a roll, you know, like they're currently kind of repeating the action, and this is where you'll find kind of your most loyal customers and your repeating customers. And then the question is, well, how do you kind of engage and improve the retention rate of people who are at least showing some kind of already engagement? And also why it matters. Improving the experience for current users is also critical for long-term growth. If, again, we think about Facebook, Facebook didn't really settle with the fact that they were having a product usage interval that is monthly. What they did is they basically said, okay, our retention rate is kind of optimized for monthly. Let's set tougher goals. Let's put the product usage interval to weekly. They do that by focusing on the current user segment. That's what allows them to kind of reduce the product usage interval. So it is quite important, and it does the ability to have a retention and measure it on a daily versus monthly for Facebook in terms of revenue is the difference in billions. It's incredibly, it's a ton more profitable. And how do you do this? Well, you need to figure out what the users are and aren't doing. So what that means is that you can do things like adding a habit breaker. You can also enhance and improve existing features. I'll try to talk a bit about habit breakers, because habit breaker is just like this weird name that I kind of just found in a book. So I essentially read a book on Buddhism. And in Buddhism, they have this concept of a habit breaker. And what they say in Buddhism is that the issue that we have is that most people kind of default to patterns. Like we like doing the same thing over and over. When I go from home and I go to work, I literally every single day drive the same bike route and I zone out. Like I have no fucking clue what I'm doing. And then every time I get to work, I feel like I've just taken some kind of, or I just woke up and I'm like, oh, holy fuck, how did I get here? Because I kind of just zone out for 30 minutes while I'm biking, and then you just realize you kind of arrived. So what you want to do is, and what you need to realize is that this kind of zoning out happens with the users engaging with your product as well. Especially if they're engaging with your product over time, they're going to get to this phase where they kind of zone out using your product while they still engage with it. So what you can do is that if you want to prevent that, you can add habit breakers. So these are things that make the users kind of wake up and realize what they're actually engaging with, but without adding any clutter. So I'll give you an example of a company that I think I've done this quite well, which is Google. So Google does this thing where they're still kind of working on improving their experience for current users, but they're not adding any features. Like they're not adding any new complexity, they're not kind of doing a redesign or anything else. What they're doing here is they're simply kind of just playing with the logo and adding something that when you go to Google, you will be like, oh, something is kind of new and something's kind of different. So it's just about giving them like 2 seconds where you go, okay, this is refreshing, and then people kind of just continue with their work. Yes?
Would like playing Tetris in Google Maps, would that also be a habit breaker?
Well, Easter egg. Well, it's more of an Easter egg, but yeah, it's an Easter egg. But it's kind of a good-ish kind of a habit breaker, but I would say that's more of a ish hidden Easter egg, because this has no use. It's more from the visual perspective of trying to kind of make you take out of this automatic, I go on Google and I perform a query. It's kind of to make you re-appreciate the value of what you're actually using in a way.
Yeah, think about Uber when it's like Bouquet Pride or something. They just put the thing in a different color.
Yeah.
Right? It's just a habit breaker. It doesn't change the UX design, it doesn't change the experience of the user. Just change the habit.
Cool. All right, so we've talked about new users, we've talked about current users, and then we have resurrected users. So resurrected users are defined by their presence in the current interval, which means that this month they have decided to make a purchase in our e-commerce store. However, last month they did not make a purchase. However, in the past, at some point we do not really care when they made a purchase. So the past interval could be 4 months ago, it could also be 2 years ago, we don't really give a shit. It's just in the past. Because if they're not in the past, then they're, by definition, a new user. Right? So this is what would make them a resurrected. It's the fact that they decided this month to kind of come back. Prior to that, they would just be in the past interval. So resurrected user defined by current interval and past interval. Here, and why it matters, there's a lot of untapped potential to bring users back and also more active users back. The issue is that it's also quite tough. And a lot of companies default to focusing on this when they focus on retention. They think that retention is the attempt to resurrect users. I would say that's very often not what you should be focusing on. It's also incredibly expensive, and people constantly do the same tricks, so please don't, because here everyone does the same shit and it doesn't work, and I don't understand why people don't realize it doesn't work. Like if your users don't want to use your product and then you try to get your users back by giving them discount to your product, that makes no sense. Like they don't like your product. You're giving them something they don't care about. So please do not try to like resurrect users by giving them like a discount code or anything else. It makes no sense. It's like if I sell a pair of shoes, if I sell these shoes and I say I don't want them anymore, and then I go, yeah, but here you go, here's 10% off. Then you're like, I don't think you get it. Like I don't want these shoes. It doesn't matter if it's 10% off. So please don't do like a coupon code to attempt to resurrect users. it's going to have a very low conversion rate if so. And the people who do convert, if you kind of just look at basic principles of economy, very often the lowest paying users or the users who value the price of something are also your worst customers. If you guys have ever done freelance, then I can at least personally testify the pain in the ass customers I had are the people who are constantly fighting me on budget. While if you work with a high client that pays well, they never have complaints. So do understand that you're also optimizing for what I would call poor customers.
Let's say so price sensitive customers are in that bracket of poor customers or more different customers.
Mm-hmm. All right, so the question is, well, then how do we save a relationship? Again, back to kind of the dating. These are my 4 tactics. Different conversion rate, I shall admit. The first, you can do the begging. Nobody really likes the beggar in a relationship. That's the person who goes like, please take me back. Okay. It sometimes works, but if you've ever followed a relationship where that has been the reason why they got together, it also ends quite quickly. Again, it's the same with retention. If you go, here's 40% off, they will enjoy it for a month and then they're off again. So please understand begging, it sometimes works, but it doesn't really work. You can do the your loss tactic, which is basically when you've just broken up with your partner and then you decide to post pictures on Instagram pretending you have a really sweet life and you don't care. And you're going, basically, we're having fun without you, life is good. That does sometimes work, and the way you could do this from a product point of view is you can send product updates. So while you were gone, we have updated this feature and we've added this feature and it's used by 1.5 million users. That's showing your loss tactic. And then you can also be more open, which is just about communication within the app. Also in a relationship, it's when you go like, when I say this, what I really mean is that I'm hurt. You know, it's that conversation. So be more open. All of these tactics kind of just work.
So being more open, like with the product, how does that translate?
I'll show you what I mean specifically by this in 2 slides. So the takeaway when it comes to resurrected users is that we need to understand that very often resurrected users actually do not mind that we hold their hand when they come back to your product. And I do think people don't get this fully correct, but a lot of people that want, or a lot of people that do come back, they do not mind that you kind of engage with them a bit more to help them have success. Because they also realized, or they've regained and re-understood the value of your product, but they also realize they haven't really engaged with your product for a certain period of time. Furthermore, there's kind of 2 principles that you can decide to focus on. It's utility and education. So with utility, you're making it easier to accomplish the task that they would like. For education, you're helping users understand why they should use your product. And again, just understand that they do want help. So the way you engage with resurrected users can be a bit more active than how you would address the other segments. Now, what I've done is I've created what I call like the welcome home package. These are 3 different things that very often work when you want to work on the resurrected user segments. So it's basically one for utility, one for educating, and then one for personalizing. And this is something I'm pretty certain most products can kind of directly apply. For this example, it's an example on my Pinterest when they're working on the segment of resurrected users. Then these also include the results. The first one is utility-focused experiments. So what they realize is that when you're a new user, speed is incredibly important. Now in Pinterest is very much driven by visual imagery. And if you've ever been a developer, then you know that working with images and trying to make a page pass is literally fucking incredibly difficult. So for Pinterest, who lives on just showing images, optimizing for speed is a constant pain in the ass, right? So what they decided to do is they decided to simplify the experience when a new user has been resurrected. So instead of showing a default set of, say, 10 pictures per window frame, what they would do is they would show 7 pictures. And then over time, they would kind of reintroduce them to the default settings. Now, what happened is that they realized through utility that performance has a higher key indicator for success for resurrected users than the amount of images, right? They understood that currently the utility of them being easily able to access and perform and use the app is more important than actually having enough images. And then over time, what they do is they reintroduce it. So say, for example, once the resurrected user has performed the core action 2-3 times, all of a sudden the amount of images goes from 7 to 8, for example. And then they kind of just expose them. So they're kind of doing a new user experience, but more focused on resurrected users. For them, it kind of had a percentage or performance change, which basically increased or decreased results by 10% in user wait time, which for them as a social network is huge. Furthermore, labels on buttons. It's just like a very quick thing that you can do. What a lot of people do and what a lot of apps do is that they do no labels. So they have the icons and then people kind of just know what the icons mean. Now, the main issue here is that people don't actually know what these buttons mean. They have muscle memory, and that's what's going on. They don't really understand what the buttons mean. So to give an example, the classic person, this silhouette icon. What does the silhouette icon mean?
Account, profile.
Account, profile, user settings, yeah, friends. So already on the most used icon, which I would say is the silhouette of a person, there's like 4 or 5 definitions of what it can mean. Now, what happens in the mostly used apps is that they don't have the labels. The reason why you don't need a label is because people have gathered muscle memory. So I bet now if I do a test, I can quite easily make you change tabs on Instagram without having to look on the screen because you remember intuitively where each button is. Now, that's when you can kind of remove the labels because people are not really looking at the buttons anymore, they're relying on muscle memory. But in order to rely on muscle memory, you need to have an understanding of it initially. So when it comes to reactivating users, you need to re-educate them. That means enabling by default kind of this helper that was happening before people got muscle memory and before people got a repetitive pattern. So what they did is that on resurrected users, they would re-add the label, and to them that increased reactivation rate by 1%. 1% sounds not too much, but again, if we look on the fact that there's a social network, it's million upon users. And also the fact that 5% increase in retention is 12 to 25% increase in profit. So 1% increase is pretty strong. Then the last one is just classic personalization. I feel like we've kind of gone through this and you know what I mean by this. It's just creating a personalized onboarding experience. Twitter does this, Netflix is kind of famous for doing this. Very often, and I'm sure you've heard the example of Netflix, what they did is they just run it as a fake test. You can personalize, nothing happens. A lot of the people still do that. It has really good results. So if you just want to test it as an experiment, then that's a really good test to see if personalization works. Because it's kind of just like a placebo test. As long as people think it's personalized, it doesn't really have to be. So that's the 3 things that you can work on when it comes to resurrected users. To sum it up, these are the 3 segments that we're going to be working with. Once you kind of get a good understanding of the framework, you can also kind of put the lifecycle framework on steroids, and I'll show you how you could do that. But the main thing to remember is new users are present in the current interval. Current users are present in the current interval and the last interval, and then resurrected users are present in the current interval and have been present in the past interval, but they're not present in the last interval, which is last month. So now all of a sudden, hopefully when we look at the retention lifecycle framework, it makes slightly more sense. So what happens here is you have acquisition. Once an acquisition is performed, they go into the segment of being a new user. After they're a new user, you focus on activation. If you're successfully able to do activation, they transition from the state of being a new user into going into the state of being a current user. Once they're a current user, there's kind of 2 things that they can do. They can either become a power user, which you can define as another segment as well. I typically do this, so I add an additional segment, which is power user. They can transition to that state, or they can transition to the state of being a churned user. And then from a churned user can go through resurrection, and then they become a resurrected user. A resurrected user can go through reactivation. Through reactivation, you go from resurrected to current, and then that's kind of how the loop follows, right? And then you also have the ability to churn both on new user, current user, and resurrected user. All right, so we've done product usage interval, we've done the retention lifecycle framework, and then we're still not done because we have one more thing, which is the heartbeat ratio. After the heartbeat ratio, I think we will do the break. And then we will do the exercise for this after lunch. So the heartbeat ratio is also a good way to measure retention. So typically we measure retention again by the graph, but this will give us a number. This number will also indicate whether or not we have what I would call true growth. And the formula is quite simple. The formula is basically you take the total amount of new users, so the total amount of people that you have in the new user segment, you plus that out with the amount of resurrected users that you have in that segment, and then you divide it by the total amount of churned users on your entire platform. And then the result is going to be a number either lower than 1 or higher than 1. If the number is higher than 1, then you are experiencing what I would call true growth, which means that you're gaining more new users than you're losing users. This is not the case for most companies. Most companies do not have true growth because their user base of people that are in the churn base is so huge that it drags down the results. And then if it's below 1, that means you're not really growing. So you're not truly experiencing what we would call true growth. And again, the definition of true growth is that you're gaining more new users than you're actually losing them. So I think this is how we cut it, and then we do lunch. Just to make you guys understand how far behind we are. I think we're going to do the exercise now, and that was supposed to last for 50 minutes, I think. So we're 50 minutes behind schedule, which says something about me. But yeah, let's go to lunch now. What a kiss ass. All right, let's go for lunch, and then come back. How long is lunch for you guys?
An hour and 9.
45? So.
Do you mind if I ask you a question about this business about the company I'm working for?
No, go ahead.
So the business is in self-storage product, basically.
Self-storage or shelf? Okay.
Self-storage.
Yeah.
Like a storage facility, basically.
Okay. Online or offline?
Offline. Yeah. So there are a lot of those in the US, I think, and not as many in the Netherlands. Relatively new thing for the Netherlands. Yes. The question is like, how to understand first of all, I need to dig into the personas, understand the customer, who's the customer, but typically I think users are people who are moving the houses from one house to another, like they're relocating. Let's operate now under this assumption. So this happens like once in 7 years. On average, in all of us, right? Like people don't change their houses that often.
Yep.
Let's assume.
Yep.
Yeah. So then, regarding the retention ratio, I'm just wondering, like, it's a pity because it just takes like 7 years, more or less, roughly, right, for the user to come back, and because of the nature of the business, to start using the service. Like, how can I maximize on the retention rate? And one more kind of question. The last heartbeat ratio, what's interesting is that maybe my kind of churn rate actually use like people because they constantly getting new people and people moving out, right, from the storage. So is that something I can kind of use for this heartbeat? Maybe like the churn rate I can maybe use. Can I use the people who are moving out physically from the facility, or that would be kind of wrong?
Yeah, no, I think you can do that. How to measure retention? I guess for you, optimizing for them using their storage would be your goal.
Yeah, but how? Like, they say, I don't need you every 5 years. Like,
yeah, but
it's an assumption. Again, I don't have numbers to validate that.
Yeah, I would say for the people who have a storage unit, they do engage with the unit more than every 5 years. I would typically say when it's winter, people will store their winter, say snowboard or skiing, then you would put it there, and then you go and pick it up and everything else. But then you also use it for larger storage.
Yeah.
I think you use it for kind of seasonal things and everything else. So my idea, based on not really knowing anything, would just be try to, maybe you can optimize for them adding stuff to the storage unit. If the storage unit is empty, then they're going to churn. If your storage unit is packed, then the likelihood of them churning, I would say, is quite low. Because more stuff they put in there, there's more burdensome it is to get out.
Yes.
So if you can make them put a lot of stuff in there, then ending is not easy. But if they only have, say, a pair of skis, then they're gonna churn. So then you could look at retention as a way of how can I optimize people to store more.
And longer. And longer.
Yep.
Okay. Interesting. Yeah, thanks a lot.
Let's get some lunch.
How
are you feeling?
You're pretty hard. Oh wow. Hey.